Okay, so I did all the tests with the stock electronics back in, case all back, that I showed you already. But even after I did all the stuff inside with the foam and this rubber layer, there were still a couple of other things that I could do. I mentioned the barrel is one thing, the flywheels is another. But one of the things which, from the very beginning, I realized I might be able to do something with is these isolation pads that basically take this portion from here to where it's held onto by the barrel, where the only mechanical connections that hold this to the rest of the gun are these points. So from here backwards there are screws that hold the running gear to the gun, and at the front it's held by the barrel. Now this is not a particularly strong connection at the barrel. You've got a plate here which itself isn't screwed in. I don't know if you can actually glue it in, because the problem is to get everything in you need to be able to wiggle it around quite a bit, so I think you might need to leave this front bit loose, which basically means that this whole bit, all the vibrations in here kind of waggles, get transmitted to the outer case by 1, 2, 3 that you can see, and then on the case there's another one that presses on the side of the motor, and each of these things is just like a little puck. It's basically there's a little stalk on the back of it which pokes into a hole and it's glued. They use some really quite tough rubbery glue, which is a bit of a pain. You can't sort of crack it off, but the top piece is just a round puck. So I bought some sorbothane. Now sorbothane is this stuff that is kind of one of these geeky hi-fi things that it's quite common in the sort of tweakers, upgraders kind of world, and it's a little bit in a similar kind of way to the rubber mat that I've used on the case. It's rubbery, but it's kind of squishy too. It's a little bit like memory foam. Now this stuff, it will give completely and is kind of gooey, like toffee almost. This sorbothane stuff is more like rubber, but it has a little bit of give, and it's that sort of kind of gooiness rather than just pure rubber texture that means that it absorbs some of the energy. So these are used to isolate vibrations in pieces of hi-fi equipment from the tables that they're sitting on. So these pieces are not the right shape. Obviously I'd have to cut them to the shape, but this rubber material is really very tricky to cut. So using even the sharpest knife, because this stuff is quite soft, that when you're cutting it, it's impossible to get a perfect slice. There's always a bit of drag. The blade kind of drags on the rubber, which bends it, which means that the thing you're cutting is bending as you're cutting it. So, like a really gooey loaf of bread, it's quite difficult to cut a straight slice. Well, it's like that, but really quite noticeably. So it's very difficult to get a sort of straight cut. But what I found was a nice, neat trick. I figured, probably this rubber, like most rubbers, would melt when it gets hot. So I thought, if I could get a knife hot enough, I should be able to cut this rubber. So I had a quick practice. I've got a sort of turbo flame lighter which will get this thing. Oh, and interesting enough, actually, some of the colours that I realised come on the knife from the heating are the exact same ones that I've used on the barrel. But basically you get it, it'll get up so that it's glowing. It doesn't stay glowing for very long, but you get it as hot as you can. There we go. And once it's hot, this will cut quite neatly. There you go. Through this. That's a really clean slice through the end of that. So what this meant was that I could get these sort of pucks and do clean slices through them, and then from this middle slice sort of do slices like through a loaf, and end up with a bunch of pieces like this. Now I measured how thick these pieces would need to be. I can't remember what it was. Each puck is about a bit more than 3 millimeters. So then go up to my sort of my dome that I've got the slice through, and just do slices of as close to that thickness as I could. So the other thing is obviously the size of them, and I sort of played around with various different things, drawing around them, but it turns out the back end of my permanent marker, one of my small ones, is exactly the same as this, as each of them, which is really nice. So it just meant I could get some pigment, dip it in some of my pigment, poke it on these little slices that I had. So now it should be, in theory, just a case of I'm going to try to not use this because I don't really need the edges to be perfect. It was the top and bottom surface that I wanted to be straight and parallel and of the right thickness. The side bits not so much, and I don't really like heating up this blade. It is kind of gross when the rubber melts. We'll just have a go at seeing if I can just use a regular sharp knife. I'm hoping it's going to be enough, and just gradually chop these down. Let's have a look. Yeah, so I should, I'm hoping. Yeah, so I can get these to sort of pretty much the right shape. They don't need to be perfect, because if so long as they're big enough, so long as they cover the contact points, if they're not the perfect shape, it doesn't really matter. Right, so there we go. So the mad thing is, when I was playing around with this, trying to cut these pieces with the sharp knife originally, before I used the hot knife, I spent ages. I spent like whole evenings trying to cut pieces that were usable, and they were just all slightly different thicknesses. And I think the thing is, I'll try and match up the thicknesses of each of these with like pairs, because if there's an imbalance and the thing doesn't want to close, or if there's a gap, then that will increase the vibration. So yeah, I spent ages though playing around with these to try and get it right, and now persevering, this is much better. This is much more consistent and easier, which is a good sign. So I'm going to chop these out and glue these in. Repack in, do a bit more of the acoustic stuff, try and pack in a tiny little bit more than I had done before, close it all up. Oh, the other thing is the fix to the hopper. I don't know if anybody else has had this problem, but I was finding that I was getting a lot of jams, and actually the rounds were getting stuck in the hopper. They weren't getting stuck in the flywheels, they're getting stuck in the hopper, and they were kind of doubling up and bunching up and getting stuck. And I thought that it was because, I've sprayed this and paint had gone inside, and I thought perhaps it was rough and it was catching. I thought, or maybe some of these pieces were sort of compressing it, or maybe some of the stuff that I'd used on the sides of the gun was compressing it and squishing it, and so sort of holding the balls too tightly. But it turns out it was much simpler than that. It was there's this little catch which normally comes down. It's spring loaded and it comes down, so when you take it out of the gun, this thing will come down. And it's just a little arc that's sort of hidden up there, a little piece of plastic that stops the balls from falling out. But you put it in the gun, and in the gun there's a catch here which pushes it all the way up, so it gets it out the way, basically allowing the balls to go into the gun. But even just the tiniest little bit of this plastic latch poking down gives enough resistance to the balls that the conveyor belt can't quite push it in, can't quite push it through this, and that's when it gets bunched up. So I just glued this up because, worst case scenario, you take it out and sort of a few balls fall out, but so long as you're holding it correctly, that's not going to happen. Plus, I'm going to be leaving it in there most of the time, so that will have fixed that. So yeah, just a case of getting this out, chopping these out, getting the one off the case as well. Yeah, so none of this is screwed in yet. Okay, so I'm going to do another test, final test. So this now has absolutely everything. It's got all of the rubber and acoustic foam, it's got the Sorbothane, and all the final pieces are in place. So these two bits here were open to the air before. They're now filled, jam doors back on, voltmeters in, all the extra body pieces are in as well. I'll do a quick test now with the stock battery, do a final test with this, and then, wow, it's quite a lot heavier now, and then I'll do on 3S. So let's have a look. So it was from 90 down to about 83 or 4. Right, it's a little difficult to grip this with one hand. I'll do that one more time. Okay, I should actually mention, I forgot to say that this has the flywheels in as well. Yeah, the new flywheels do add a different kind of character to the sound. It's more of a high-pitched whir, there's less rattle. I mean, you can hear it, at full speed it does still resonate a bit, but it's less than it was before. Yeah, just higher pitch, just slightly better machined wheels, so less kind of mid-frequency vibration. Right, I'll swap out the battery for 3S and we'll see how crazy loud that is. So that gets up to 82. So it's maybe a 1-2 decibel reduction with the Sorbothane and the flywheels versus all the other acoustic stuff that I did. So the first acoustic stuff took it down from 90 to about 83 or 84. This gets it down to about 82 with the flywheels and the Sorbothane. So let's try on 3S. Alrighty, so we're going to reset it. This is on 3S now. Got 12.5 volts left. Alright, let's see if we can get any more than 82. Okay, so on 3S this gets back up to the original volume, but the quality of the sound is different. So if you listen to a normal Perses right off the bat, out of the box, with stock battery and electronics, you get up to about 90. But there's quite a lot of rattle in that. This is now, with all the acoustic stuff on 3S, gets to that same volume, but it sounds a bit different. Yeah, so the volume reduction is mainly the acoustic stuff, but the quality of the sound, the super high pitch whir, is, I would say, mainly down to the flywheels. Yeah, I was really surprised by the flywheels. They seem to spin up faster as well. Rate of fire. I mean, the Perses is more than the Nemesis, but yeah, it's interesting.